Hello and welcome into part 5 of our notes. We're going to focus on the monarchy in England today and the English Civil War. So, going all the way back to Queen Elizabeth I, she dies without an heir. And just like we see with any of these examples, without certainty of a new monarch rising to power, that instability usually arises. And with this, it's no different. James I is considered to be the nearest relative. He was already King of Scotland at this point, so it just kind of was one of those things where it made sense to allow him to become the King of England. He writes what's known as the Law of the True and Free monarchies, that kings rule by divine right. So again, solidifying this idea that they get their power from God. One of the important things to keep in mind here, though, was that James was Protestant. He tolerated Catholics in England, but again was the one to kind of still continue this idea that England would continue to be a Protestant nation, just like it had been under Queen Elizabeth. James, though, does have problems, though. And the first problem really comes with the Protestants. And you have individuals that are known as Puritans at this time. In the United States, we know a lot about the Puritans because of their expulsion in their colony to Massachusetts Bay in what is present-day Boston. But during this time, they wanted the Anglican Church to basically get rid of the ritualistic stuff and the ceremonies that were still present in the Anglican Church as kind of these lasting vestiges or remains of the Catholic Church. Aside from agreeing on the translation of the Bible, the King James Version, he basically says that he's not going to reform any other parts of the Anglican Church. And the problem with this is that it's not just a religious conflict, it is a political one. The Puritans, there's many that are part of Parliament at this time. So you have this issue with people in Parliament feeling that these were good requests as opposed to King James, who was the absolute monarch, saying, yeah, I'm not going to go forward with these requests. A lot of these Puritans feel persecuted by what's going on under James, and they decide that they're going to leave England in mass.
The second problem that King James had with England was really related to economics. And James is constantly overspending to the point where he wants Parliament to raise taxes to pay debts, which is a big problem. Parliament basically says no to this unless he agrees to certain religious requests that they had put in place. The other big problem that we see during the reign of King James is related to foreign policy. James arranges a marriage with his son Charles I and a Catholic princess named Henrietta. Now, why was this a problem? It was seen mainly as somewhat of an unholy marriage because of England's stance at this point as a Protestant nation, while this would lead to more Catholic influences on the English monarchy.
Charles I becomes King of England and is fighting in wars at this point in time. Charles I also dismisses Parliament when he is refused money. And again, it goes back to this idea of the Petition of Rights. Charles I decides that he's not going to sign it, he's going to ignore it, and then eventually does sign it but continues to ignore this petition in order to get money. He decides that he's going to impose fees and fines on people that do not follow what he says, and imprisons those that refuse to pay the fines. Now again, the big thing to keep in mind here with Charles I, since he's the son of King James, he is Anglican, but since his wife, Henrietta, is Catholic, a lot of his decisions are influenced by the fact that she is Catholic, and we see that in what happens in England. This idea of the Petition of Rights, going back to Charles I, and this conflict between him and Parliament, and then imposing fees on this. The Petition of Rights basically states that these are basically, it's a list of complaints. And the king is not allowed to do the following things. The king cannot force loans or levy taxes without parliament. The king cannot imprison without a cause. The king cannot house soldiers without an owner's consent. Charles agrees to this, but again, after he gets his money from parliament, he basically ignores the petition moving forward. And this, again, sets up the power dynamic here. Who has all the power? Does Parliament have it, right, as the voice of the people, essentially, or does the king have it because he is essentially the voice of the god, if you believe in this idea of divine right? And Charles believes in divine right, says, hey, Parliament, I really don't have to answer to you, so you know what? I'm not going to summon you back in session for about 11 years. From 1640 to 1660, we have what's known as the Long Parliament. And essentially, this is done to try to limit the power of the king, as well as remove any sort of unpopular officials that were causing problems with the reign at this time. They pass a law that's known as a law that's passed basically to make sure that the king has to call on parliament every 3 years. And this is done mainly because of what we saw previously with this lack of calling parliament to session for 11 years. The law also condemns Charles I. It calls him a tyrant, an oppressive ruler, because he's not following the laws of Parliament and is ignoring things that were passed in exchange for, again, that money that he had asked for earlier. Charles decides, yep, all right, Parliament, you're really overstepping your responsibilities. Parliament, you're not staying in your lane, and tries to arrest leaders that were in opposition to him with these laws. They do escape, and what we see is by 1642 that there's a full-on civil war in England. And the Civil War lasts from 1642 to 1649. The two sides are the Cavaliers, the king's supporters that are mainly nobles and lords, people in rural areas of England, while the Roundheads were people that were supporters of Parliament. They cut their hair support mainly because that was seen as a protest to the more like aristocratic hairstyles that the nobles had that was much longer and much more ornate. This was mainly a cross-section of people that were either Puritans or part of the middle class. The Commonwealth is what rises at the end of the Civil War, and Charles is found guilty of treason. Because of this, he is executed, right? So he's condemned by his own people, he is found guilty and condemned to death, and then executed. Oliver Cromwell, that general that we talked about last slide, he proclaims England as a republic, right, or what's known as the Commonwealth. He abolishes the monarchy. He also abolishes the House of Lords, the upper house of English Parliament. So he just keeps the House of Commons in place. And this republic is not a new form of government, but it's something that we haven't necessarily seen, and it's definitely something that's different in this time period of absolutism. The state, the supreme power that is held by the state is held by the people and their representatives in an elective body, in this case Parliament, or they could be nominated, but it's individuals rather than a monarch. So again, the power comes from the people as opposed to God, as it would in an absolute monarchy.
So the Commonwealth is ruled under by Oliver Cromwell, who is named Lord Protector. And during this time, we see some changes, but overall, this is a relatively unpopular time period in England. While they support religious tolerance for certain Protestant groups, this is not extended to different Catholic that are living in Europe at the time. We see that Parliament is dissolved in 1654 and a new constitution is drafted during this time. England, Wales, Scotland are all united under one government and given seats in Parliament. Again, Lord Protector Cromwell is relatively unpopular through basically his entire reign, but this gets worse and worse as time goes on. He eventually dies and then ends up extending this role to his son. His son is a very ineffective leader, to put it kindly, and because of this, people start to see, okay, well, this was passed down through from father to son, and it's still very unpopular. They're essentially ruling England by themselves, so we see that people start to want a return of the monarch, and that's exactly what's going to happen.
Charles II comes to power in 1660, when the Parliament, ironically, decides that Cromwell is not the person to rule England. The Commonwealth, or this Republican form of government, is not working. So they ask the son of Charles I, who they killed, to come back to England, because he was living in exile at France at that time, to become Charles II. The monarchy is restored, and he works to kind of restore Parliament, to give them powers back. He also decides that he's going to give every prisoner the right to trial, so that they have a right to explain what they're being accused of, what they did wrong, and that they could not simply be put in jail because they weren't liked. This is the idea of habeas corpus, and it's a modern tenet of most judicial systems, that you have a right to know what the crimes that you're being accused of and to be tried for those, that you can't just be thrown in jail. After Charles II, we see James II rise to power in 1685. He is disposed of during the Glorious Revolution, this idea, this kind of nonviolent revolution that takes place. He's replaced with William and Mary, James' eldest daughter and son-in-law. William marches basically his army into London at the time of James II. Here's the important thing to keep in mind with this. When James comes to power, okay, after Charles is out of power, James is a Catholic, and James is seeking to basically restore Catholic rule to France. This is heavily unpopular, which is the reason that he is kicked out of power, that he's disposed, and that William and Mary are put in place to try to reunite England under Protestant rule. William, from the Netherlands, is able to force James II to flee, and William and Mary finally take power over the English throne. What they do is a couple of things that really reform England, though. They vow to recognize Parliament as their partner in ruling England, not a subservient body like it was under absolute rule. They sign the English Bill of Rights into law, this idea that people in England are not just subjects, but they are people with rights. Out of all that happens at this time, we see that the English government is essentially formed as what we know today still. There's a prime minister, there's the cabinet of officials, the monarch still exists as the sovereign, and a parliament as well as the partnership that we see moving forward. This form of government is still a monarchy, but is a constitutional monarchy, where there are things that are put in place to basically provide guardrails so that no one person gets absolute power again in England. What this English Bill of Rights looks like that William and Mary put in place is it says the monarch cannot cancel laws, the monarch cannot impose taxes unless the Parliament agrees with those taxes. There has to be free elections of Parliament, and that they have to meet frequently, that they can't just not meet for 11 years at all times. If there's these excessive fines that are put in place, they are now forbidden. Any sort of other cruel and unusual punishment is also forgiven. These reforms that had happened under previous Monarchs are now solidified into law, as well as that people can complain about the monarch without being arrested. This idea of freedom of speech is very new, but is very, very important in protecting the rights of Englishmen moving forward. The English Bill of Rights does a lot of things, but essentially what it is doing is it is establishing a government that is based on laws, that there are rules and guardrails to what power looks like and what individual powers or freedoms people have as well. It's not a system that's based on the desires of a ruler, but it is based on what is best for the people. So thank you again for listening into our notes. This does officially conclude our notes on this unit or topic of absolutism in Europe. I hope you continue to listen to these notes, and I hope you find them to be informative as we go forward. If there's any particular content that would be most helpful, always feel free to drop a comment, and I can always provide more explanation as we move forward on this or on other topics. Thanks again for listening.